Ministry saying that an Iranian missile has been intercepted by the Patriot defense system. And there are also reports of explosions in Bahrain.
অবশেষে ইরানে যুক্তরাষ্ট্রের হামলার অনুমোদন দিলেন প্রেসিডেন্ট ডোনাল্ড ট্রাম্প। সম্ভাব্য যুদ্ধের আদেশ বাস্তবায়নে প্রস্তুত মার্কিন সামরিক বাহিনী।
Just now, well, we know that the French government is very keen for this issue to be discussed as quickly, as soon as possible. But also one final thought, not every government in Western Europe is having the same perspective as the E3. The Spanish Prime Minister, the Spanish government earlier on social media posting a condemnation both of Iran for what it has done, but also for what the United States and the Israeli government have done. So there is an element of discord amongst some European capitals.
Okay, thank you so much for all of that, Dominic. Dominic came for us in Berlin. Well, the UK Maritime Trade Operation says it's received multiple reports from vessels operating in the Gulf, saying they had received messages that the Strait of Hormuz is closed. The strait is a crucial oil export route and connects the biggest Gulf oil and gas producers such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. We're going to bring in our guest once again to help us continue digesting what has been going on. Fawad Azadi standing by for us in Tehran. If we can go back to you first of all. Obviously, this is probably not a surprising thing that Iran's trying to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. What other levers does it have to try and make this as disruptive as possible? Not just for the US and Israel, but all of the Gulf states that are being affected so far.
You know, we lost about 80 little girls, schoolgirls, that their school is in the southern part of Iran, right next to the Persian Gulf. This morning, their school was bombed by United States and Israel. And this is very close to the area that you are talking about. So we are talking about a war zone. Citizens, civilians are getting killed. And ships that are passing through, engaging in normal trade, making a buck, I wouldn't advise it. You know, Iran wanted to avoid a war. Iran was in the middle of negotiations. The Omani foreign minister last night said that they could have an agreement today. And instead of having an agreement, we have had dozens of casualties because the US decided to attack Iran. So engaging in normal trade in this part of the world today or tomorrow, or as long as the US government is attacking Iran illegally, would not be a good business practice. I don't think Iranian government purposefully is trying to shut down the Straits of Hormuz, but ships should think twice before passing through.
Okay. Obviously, the Trump administration, as well as Israel, would have taken all of this into account, all of the levers that Iran had. Mohammed, if we can talk about what Donald Trump has really pushed here, that this is all about regime change. He's been very clear on that in his statement that he put out on social media. Is that even possible, though, do you think?
I think it's very, very unlikely. I mean, I don't think the United States is prepared to put boots on the ground. And so I don't see a quick path to regime change. I think that the strategy is to probably try to create as much chaos and violence as possible. This is not just a U.S. war; it's a U.S.-Israeli war, and one of Israel's primary doctrines is the Dahiya doctrine, which is to try to, create maximum suffering amongst civilians. And to Dr. Fouad's point, they bombed a school and killed dozens of little girls. In 1953, the U.S. and at that time the British went in and carried out a chaos operation in hopes of bringing about regime change. And they were successful at that time. They overthrew the first democratically elected prime minister in the history of Iran. They paid thugs. They bribed people. And I think this is a similar effort. They want to create chaos and violence and then hope that some folks on the ground will carry out the actual changing of the system, but I think it's very, very unlikely.
And that's what we heard from Donald Trump as well, Paul, calling on the Iranian people to stand up and take over the streets once it's safe to do so. Can you just give us an idea, this idea of chaos and violence that Mohammed was talking about? I guess the initial strikes are the easy part in any of this, but what happens next? What is Trump's next move to go to, do you think?
Well, what happens next is what we're all trying to figure out, because there are several different scenarios. One is the United States and Israel are just committed to a kinetic, violent path that removes the upper echelon of Iran's political and possibly religious establishment, and then leaves the door open for someone to fill that vacuum, which could be something like in Venezuela, which looks very much like an inside job, or it could be something that is an outcome the United States doesn't want, the IRGC actually taking effective control of Iran. It could also be that the United States believes in a day or two that it has made its point and that Iran will be forced back to the negotiating table, regime change will disappear as a goal, and President Trump will go back to his message in the State of the Union and only talk about credible guarantees for nuclear disarmament, giving up a nuclear weapon. In between those things, when you go to war, lots of things can be unleashed that you don't have any control over. You mentioned earlier that you were sure the Trump administration had taken many factors into account. I'm not sure that they did. The policy process in the Trump administration is not careful, effective, or thorough. This is an administration that runs, as the kids would say, on vibes. And the fact that we are sitting here in Doha, one of the most peaceful countries in the Middle East, where for the third time in a year we are under attack by one country or another, really signifies that something has gone wrong with the calculus of means and ends in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, the word unprecedented has been well used today as well as over the last 8 or 9 months. Fawad, if we can go back to you, obviously Donald Trump's talking about regime change. That's obviously going to be an incredibly difficult, as Mohammed was saying, if not impossible situation. What would it potentially change to? Who could potentially take over, do you think?
You know, when you talk to real Iran experts like our brother Mohammed in Doha, this is what they would tell you, that changing Iranian government is not going to be really possible. The only people that advocate the idea of changing Iran's government as a possibility are people who work for Israeli think tanks. Other serious observers of Iran, scholars of Iran, realize that the current government came about after a very popular revolution that overthrew one of the most corrupt governments in history of Iran and the world. The Shah's government was one of the most corrupt governments of the 20th century for sure. And bringing back his son, who is a fascist, who visited Israel 2 times in the middle of genocide, is not going to be a very bright idea. He has very little support in Iran. I don't want to say less than 1%, because that would be too much. Everybody knows that he's on the payroll of Netanyahu. Some people here may be dissatisfied with government policies, but they don't want to be foot soldiers for Trump and genocidal people. They understand Trump and genocidal people. They understand what's going on. They understand their country is under attack. The parents of those 80 little girls in city of Minab in southern Iran are very angry at the people who caused those deaths. And they're going to rally around the flag. They're going to defend their country. And they're going to make sure that Trump and Netanyahu fail in these misadventures that they carry on.
Okay, Fawad Azadi, Mohammed Al-Mesri, Paul Musgrave, we'll leave it there for the moment. We really do appreciate your time, though. Okay, well, the US strikes on Iran are being carried out from air and from sea in cooperation with Israel. According to a US official speaking to Al Jazeera, the strikes on Iran will continue for at least the coming days. The official says it is an extensive air and sea campaign against Iran. The objectives are broad and tangible and will include strikes across the country. Dismantling Iranian security forces is the main purpose of the strikes. Well, Iran's Supreme National Security Council has issued a statement. It reads, according to the information obtained from these two corrupt regimes, their operations will continue in Tehran and some other cities. The government has already prepared all the needs of society and there is no concern about the supply of public necessities. Schools and universities will be closed until further notice. Banks will continue to serve the dear nation of Iran. It goes on to say government offices will operate at 50% capacity for the time being. Well, Marwan Bashara is Al Jazeera senior political analyst. He joins us live from where we are, also in Doha. Marwan, thanks for being with us once again. Can we just get your initial thoughts on how you have viewed what's played out over the last 10 hours or so?
Actually, probably it's a good thing, Tom, to just start off from where you left with your guests, because I think there's been a confusion throughout the day about what exactly is the end game here and whether it is regime change. And if it is regime change, how is it going to exactly go down in Iran? And I think it's very important to contextualize here. Simply for the last 20 years of American foreign policy in the Middle East, they tried three types of regime change in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. One was with the United Nations Security Council resolution, that's Afghanistan. One was without UN Security Council resolution, that was Iraq. One with a responsibility to protect type UN Security Council resolution that was extended to some kind of a regime change in Libya. In Iraq, there was deployment of troops on the ground, and then after a major bombing, and there was a serious regime change that turned truly disastrous, costing trillions of dollars and thousands of American soldiers and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi deaths. In Afghanistan, same, but with the United Nations Security Council resolution, they even trained an Afghan army. But 20 years later, again, they withdrew, Taliban took over, and the regime change attempt was disastrous. In Libya, there was, as I said, the United Nations Security Council resolution of responsibility to protect, not exactly regime change, but it turned to a regime change without American boots on the ground. That's important. Without American boots on the ground, the Americans were able, along with the Europeans, to change the Gaddafi regime. And the result? Disastrous. Libya continues to suffer from major divisions, major chaos, violence, and so on and so forth. So 3 attempts by the United States within 2 decades, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, proved to be more or less an utter failure. Not because Gaddafi was a good guy, he was a horrible man. Not because the Taliban are the best people, the most enlightened people, they're not. Not because Saddam Hussein ran a good government, he did not. He was a dictator. So the idea was to change those dictators with the type of American involvement with violence, military intervention, and so forth, turned out to be failure. So trying that again in Iran and expect a different result, I think there's a term for that.
Yeah, I guess that prompts the question, what has led Donald Trump to believe that this time will be different? And has Netanyahu really got his ear and he's the one who's driving Donald Trump to this?
Thank you for that, Tom. Thank you for that question, because that is the $64 billion question, right? Because for the past 8 years, we heard nothing, past 10 years, we've heard nothing from Trump but dumping on the Bush administration for getting involved in Iraq. Nothing but dumping on the Biden administration for getting involved against Russia and Ukraine. He's been dumping nonstop on his predecessors for getting involved in the forever wars that he said that if he was there, they would have never happened, and he doesn't like them, and so on and so forth. He condemned his predecessors for getting involved in the type of Iraq adventure. But he is borrowing not a page, not two, not a chapter, an entire playbook from the 2003 invasion of Iraq, in the sense of bombing Iraq without the United Nations Security Council resolution, without a real debate in Congress, without any serious attempt at explaining to the American people. Back then, by the way, some 70% of the American people supported the war in Iraq. Today, 21% support the American war against Iran. So really, it's not just a question whether the Iranian regime is corrupt or not. It probably is not exactly the best regime, and it's not enlightened, not democratic. It probably should not be there, right? It's as far as most Iranian people. But the solution is not military intervention. Hence, yes, I think to what you sort of hinted, there's clearly a Netanyahu influence here. There's clearly Netanyahu and his cronies in Washington. And no, I don't believe in some kind of a Jewish conspiracy or Israeli lobby conspiracy. I don't think that way. I think it is not exactly serious analysis. But there is a Netanyahu symbiotic influence over Trump. His cronies are influential in Washington and in the Trump administration, and they tend to influence Trump's policy in the Middle East on the question of Iran. And that's why we've seen Trump with his ego and everything else, and, for whatever other reasons he had after Venezuela, to think that he could copy that success in Venezuela, in the Middle East. And certainly there was an attempt by Netanyahu to manipulate. In Israel, they call that nudnik, right? It's really irritating, bothersome, annoying type political character like Netanyahu that is unrelenting in his pressure on the Trump administration. He saw Trump, 9, 10 times within 1 year, more than any other foreign leaders, again, getting to Trump's ear and tried to manipulate him on the question of Iran, where the American president ended up really repeating Israeli sound bites.
Marwan, we heard from US officials saying that these strikes are going to continue at least for the next few days. Iran has responded. They've said all along that they're going to try and make this a regional conflict. Are we on the precipice of a regional war, do you think?
Well, look, I mean, the fact that we here in Doha have been already subjected to, the alarms and so on and so forth, and other Gulf states have been attacked. Of course, Israel, Jordan has been under threat and so on. So clearly, this is just the beginning. We have not even passed the 24 hours, and already this is engulfing a good number of countries. And if the United States and Israel will continue the bombing and Iran continues to respond, that's certainly going to escalate. And if Iran is going to attack the American ships in the Gulf and so on and so forth, that will lead even to further escalation. So I think this is going to be snowballing, no doubt, if Trump leaving it, open-ended. Because in the end of the day, the end game is going to be shaped by the type of operation we're going to see unravel the next few days. If it's limited, then it's meant to push the Iranians back to the negotiations table with more concessions. If it's wide open, as Israel hopes it is, in order to do or effect regime change along the lines that I discussed earlier, then we're really up to a major regional war, with Iran having a good number of assets at its disposal to use, probably destabilizing a good number of its neighbors. And I think that's going to go on. Now, whether the United States would succeed to decapitate the regime and allow for something better, I certainly doubt that, because I think at best the scenario would be something that looks like a civil war. Not because, as one of your previous guests said, the Iranian regime cannot be changed ever, just because I think it is quite entrenched with some serious organization of security forces. And if the Iranian people, as Trump urged to do, turn against the regime, we're going to see a full-fledged civil war. That would be the ultimate tragedy.
Indeed. Marwan, as always, we really do appreciate your insight. We'll leave it there for the moment. Marwan Bashara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. Hoda Saadi is in Tehran and has been reporting from the ground where ongoing strikes are shaking the Iranian capital.
I'm right now in the Iranian capital's downtown. As you can hear, sounds of massive explosion are being heard after initiation of a campaign of strikes by the American and Israelis. Pastor neighborhood, which is one of the most important political areas in Iran, has been for several times targeted alongside with other military areas that are reportedly targeted as well. And that doesn't stop there, as we know that there are other places across the country, other cities that have been also targeted. This is not the first time that Iranians are facing a confrontation, specifically back in June, when the country was in the middle of negotiations and a campaign of strikes by the Americans and Israelis targeted not just nuclear facilities and nuclear scientists and not just the military headquarters, but actually the civilian infrastructures, living fatalities. And right now, as we speak to people, there is a lot of concern regarding the possibility of escalation, not just here in the capital, but also across the country. And now this is a very critical situation, because what we are hearing from the Iranian side is that there are going to be a crushing response ahead when it comes to actually preparations of the military response from Tehran side. This is a developing story, and we are closely following to see what comes next. And still, I can hear sounds of explosion here in the downtown.
Saudi Arabia has confirmed it was also targeted by Iran. The government has released a statement. It says the kingdom rejects and condemns in the strongest terms the blatant and cowardly Iranian attacks that targeted the Riyadh region and the eastern province and were repelled. It goes on to say the attacks cannot be justified under any pretext or in any way, and which came despite the Iranian authorities' knowledge that the kingdom has affirmed that it will not allow its airspace or territory to be used to target Iran. Abdulaziz Al-Ghashian is a senior non-resident fellow at the Gulf International Forum. He says the Israeli-US attacks have led to volatile uncertainty in the region.
It is exactly what the Saudi diplomacy and GCC diplomacy has been trying to avoid for years. Nightmare scenario after nightmare scenario has been manifesting before our very eyes. And this is why, unfortunately, the diplomacy has been invested in so much to avoid this. And unfortunately, we have reached this limit. Right now, I think the strikes on Iran, which led to the strikes on these Gulf capitals and these Gulf states, just simply making sure that, or reminding us that of how insecure we are really in the region. And therefore, I think that the condemnation that Saudi Arabia has issued speaks to the fact that I think it has done everything it can, just like what the Qatari statement, Israeli strikes on Iran, yet Iran still decided to strike some of these states and trespass the sovereignty. So we're right now in an era really of a nightmare scenario that's just taking place time and again. And I think what we're going to see now is a new era of just insecurity. The reason why, Riley, the reason why we have invested a great deal of this and Saudi Arabia are on the front line of two other people's wars, and now three people's wars. It's the United States, Israel, and Iran. We are on the front line here. And then as a result, the landscape is something that we're going to suffer from. So this is why there's going to be a lot of frustration and a lot of diplomacy going to be at play. And we're just going to have to wait and see. There's just many variables that are not in our hands or not in the hands of the... I anticipate the Saudi ruling elite, as well as the Gulf states and their ruling elites, are not going to throw more fuel into the fire. I think they are level-headed.
Not as a single attack. And I think until now, Qatar has been one of the most targeted states out of all of the other Arab states being targeted by Iran. I think the decision makers in Tehran don't understand how potentially damaging this is, not just for Qatari-Iranian relations, but also to Arab-Iranian relations. The view from Doha is Al-Udeid is a Qatari base. We have defense and security relationships with multiple states, not only the US. And I think all Gulf states made it very clear that no strikes will come out of Gulf bases. And we can see that using open source information, that most of the strikes happened between the US and Israel from different vectors, not including the Gulf states. And I think what will be read now is that this is, and has been in the statements we've read from all